Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everybody logged in from around the world today. And thank you very much for joining us for Diamond Global's webinar on new LMO requirements and 5 practical tips for LMO success. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Benjamin Guth, the Vice President at Diamond Global Recruitment Group. And as many of you know, at Diamond Global we specialize in helping businesses through the complex foreign recruitment process. Joining me in the webinar is Christina Hamid, one of our highly talented client logistics specialists for LMOs at Diamond Global.
Hello everyone, I'm very happy to be here today and I'm excited to share some of my personal tips with all of you in today's webinar.
And we're all very lucky to have her with us. Before we start with content today, there are a few logistics I'd like to review with you all. We are using the GoToWebinar platform for this webinar. All participants have been signed on in listen-only mode. But throughout the webinar, you are welcome to submit questions through the chat console. If you have logged on into your computer to see the presentation on the slide deck, you will notice that the GoToWebinar console is on the top right of your webinar screen. Through the chat feature, please feel welcome to type and submit your questions. We'll take questions at the end of the webinar. Your questions and your identity will only be seen by me. I'll read out your question, but keep all identities confidential. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be provided to all attendees for review and sharing at a later time. The agenda for today's webinar is to provide a quick overview of the recent LMO changes, then to step through 5 key LMO topics. These include what costs you'll need to plan for to get the most return on your money, who to talk to and why it's sometimes so difficult to get anyone on the phone at Service Canada, what the scope of your job advertising needs to be, and finally, how to help create a proper strategy for your business. In addition, we'll talk about how to handle the dreaded LMO denials which may come through in the future. Unfortunately, we will not have time to discuss absolutely everything today in detail. As many of you know, this process is exceptionally extensive, and we could speak for hours and hours on end. I would be happy to answer more questions, and some that might be a little more specific at a later date, should you have them. I must preface this webinar by saying the information and opinions provided today are the result of our 25 years of experience, working with Service Canada, completing thousands of LMOs, and anticipating Service Canada's next moves. We will discuss situations today where the government has issued mandates but has not yet provided a toolkit or a list of requirements on how to fulfill the new requirements. Today, we will try to provide suggestions on what we, as employers and third parties, can do to win the approval of the Service Canada officers based on the limited information we have available at present. Let's start by taking a quick 2 minutes to recap what an LMO is for those who may be unfamiliar with the process. A short LMO 101. The labor market opinion is an essential tool in a number of immigration programs. Most of us are here today to discuss its use specific to the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, more commonly shorthanded to the TFW program or TFWP. The reason an LMO is required is to determine the availability of the targeted local labor market. An LMO is also used to identify if hiring foreign workers will provide a negative or a neutral result on this local labor market. Are Canadians and permanent residents available to fill these roles? Officially, Service Canada officers will make a decision based on advertising efforts and results of recruitment efforts, statistical immigration figures, local employment rates, union involvement and support, and finally, the effect that these workers will have on the local Canadian labor force. We will discuss more on this later.
Some of you may be wondering about exemptions. Certain provinces and territories have LMO exemption categories that can save you time, but most importantly, money. Make sure to do your research, primarily in Yukon and Alberta, before you get started in order to determine if you need one. If the position you are recruiting for is one that falls into this category, check to see if it requires trade certification. In the case of welders in Alberta, you can choose to either get an LMO or get your candidate certified with AIT. You cannot bypass both. However, the LMO process is easier, faster, and more economical.
That's a great point. There are two primary reasons why you would use an LMO application to hire employees through the TFW program. The first is to secure temporary foreign workers to fill a labor shortage. This would be the reason why most of you would apply for many low-skilled positions or semi-skilled positions in a wide range of industry. The second reason deals with candidates who possess a specialized knowledge which is unavailable in the local labor market in order to transfer those skills and that knowledge to potential Canadian employees. Usually, this is an individual application based on a pre-selected candidate who has specific expertise. While both of these application forms are very similar, they require a completely different submission strategy. Should you need additional details regarding the difference between these types of files, please do not hesitate to reach out to me at a later date. Let's be pragmatic here. Please understand that officers look for any opportunity to deny submissions. And they rightly should, as the program should only grant foreign worker employment where Canadians are not available locally or nationally to fill this need. In step 3, we will discuss the extent of your advertising necessary to obtain a positive result. We won't have enough time, unfortunately, to discuss researching statistics or additional outreach today, but I highly encourage you spend time on Stats Canada, on their website, with industry and union associations to support your application with as many facts as possible. It would be smart to include regional and/or industry-specific employment figures, immigration figures, local and national educational enrollment figures, native employment if it applies, handy-capable community outreach, and really anything you can use to solidify your argument that you need to hire foreign labor for your business. All of this information should be put into the appendix of your application and summarized in great depth in your cover letter. You will not have another opportunity to include these details later, so be as thorough as possible in your initial original submission. A local job fair is also a great way to show that you made additional recruitment efforts. Now, as many of you already know, the individual officer will hold a lot of power over the success of your file. While this is a federal program, it is monitored and executed regionally. Sometimes it feels like every office and every officer has their own idea of how the program should be followed. It is for this reason that there is no cookie-cutter perfect LMO strategy. My one piece of universal advice that I can offer to absolutely everybody on this call today is that it is okay to be the company whose LMOs are too detailed, as long as every detail points to the universal labor shortage. Many times I have been told by Service Canada officers that our applications are often really big and requires a little bit of additional reading time for them. They often range from 80 to 140 pages in length.
Commenting on what Ben just stated, if you actually happen to follow the guidelines set out by Service Canada, a LMO application would typically be around 12 pages in length. Personally, I invest a lot of time and effort to prepare the LMO application, going over and beyond to prove my case, ensuring I prepare the LMO application for the best chance of success.
Christina, I agree with you 100%. I am completely okay with giving the Service Canada officer a little additional reading material if it means securing that approval. I would not like to be the immigration consultant who gets that LMO denial because we should have posted in additional places or our outreach was not extensive enough. Looking at the 4 new changes that affect the LMO, let's discuss each one individually. Once again, I must stress that as of today, no official guideline on how to prove or submit many of these new changes exists. The following information are based on our opinions and suggestions from the Diamond team, which is a recruitment and immigration firm operating for 25 years and successfully achieving thousands of LMO approvals. Let's start with the easiest change. English and French are the only languages that can be required on an LMO. This is pretty standard. Should you have a workplace that requires specific skills or experience only available overseas, say for example you run a Cantonese kitchen or have a fully Sri Lankan worksite, language should no longer be used as a prerequisite. Instead, if a different language or set of skills is required, you can outline the specific cuisines or unique skills rather than the language on your application. This might include training on specific equipment or experience cooking specific dishes or working with a specific style of machinery. The government regulations still allow you to request another language if it is essential, but it will be reviewed under much scrutiny. If another screening option exists, I encourage you to take it. A short list of low-skilled positions for which this rule does not apply exists currently on the Service Canada website, and I will include it in the follow-up email. The next change revolves around the LMO fee. The new LMO fee that has recently been implemented is $275 per requested individual. This came as a big shock to many business groups who were expecting a flat fee per application. Hopefully, with the addition of this fee, we will see an increased service level from our Service Canada officers. As this fee is non-refundable, it is essential that applications are submitted perfectly the first time around. Forecasting now becomes significantly more important. We will discuss a little more on this later. The next change is an interesting one. The government would now like to see that a firm plan is in place to transition to a Canadian workforce over time through the LMO process. How this is completed is still up to interpretation. The most vital element to ensure compliance with this new change is to provide some type of company-specific strategy to decrease reliance on what the government defines as a temporary program. At this time, no formal guide exists and no guidelines are available from the government to follow. My recommendation would be to use good judgment and remember to reinforce the fact that if you could find strong Canadians, you would not be using this program in the first place. If you have a specific question about what this plan might look like for you, please don't hesitate to give me a call a little later. Number 4 outlines that Service Canada has added new questions to ensure that these positions will not be used to facilitate the outsourcing or offshoring of Canadian jobs. For most of you logged on today, this is not a factor. This is generally the response to a recent, fairly prominent news report. When working around this section, 2 boxes exist on pages 4 and 5 of the current LMO application. Check No if they do not apply to you and move on. Should you find yourself looking at an outsourcing strategy, additional questions and forms exist in order to be successful with this program. Please contact me separately for guidance.
With regards to what Ben just stated, it is very important that we note that many of the requirements listed on the employment contracts have now found its place on the new LMO form. For instance, items such as transportation fees, whether it be in Canada or overseas, are now listed on the low-skilled application, Alongside that are the medical benefits and annual wage reviews.
It's important when submitting a LMO and facilitating an LMO strategy and an LMO application package that you are always using the most up-to-date forms. These may change from the time that you begin your process to the time that you actually submit. So before your final submission, check to see if Service Canada has changed those documents in any way, whether they be from an employment standards, employment contract point of view, or just the standard LMO application. This can mean the difference between an approval and a denial. As for new advertising requirements, we will discuss on this more later. Now, let's talk a little bit about what costs you'll need to plan for in order to get the most return on your money. Major costs to plan for moving forward are more than just the new fee. There are more major time costs that you'll need to commit to. You will need a full-time authorized representative in-house in order to be successful with this program. Those with experience will tell you that this is not a back burner project that can be handed down to an administrative assistant. This individual will be responsible for communicating with third-party agents, fielding the Service Canada call, interviewing Canadians and potential applicants, creating a recruitment summary, approving documents before submission. This person will also be responsible for posting ads and creating the application as well.
Speaking as a client logistics specialist for LMOs at Diamond Global, I complete about 90% of what Benjamin has just mentioned on behalf of your business. However, I would still need a contact person within your business that is available to work with someone like me. For example, I typically would need that specific someone, in other words, that main contact person, to approve the job ad that I draft. That same person should be available at any time to answer the Service Canada call, as they will want you to answer certain questions directly. That's where my handy assistant comes into play, and helping you prepare for these phone calls, where they must introduce the business directly.
That's a great point, Christina. We can make this process as easy as possible, but it is a partnership, so it is important that we do have a contact that is active within our employer. In addition to the time commitment, other costs may include the $275 fee per candidate on each application that we discussed. Now remember, if you need to renew a candidate's work permit down the line, you will most likely need a new LMO and will need to pay a new LMO fee. National advertising strategy and the funds to do this. And what I mean by that is the government will need proof of extensive advertising with national reach. This may include trades journals, newspapers, etc. The more the better. Diamond has secured a few relatively affordable options for about $60 per application, but as each position is different, advertise accordingly. You will need the funds to invest in at least an additional 2 weeks of advertising. This advertising timeline has increased from the 2-week requirement to the 4-week requirement. Lastly, you must consider the time investment involved in this process. With the most recent changes, budget for many hours spent posting ads, reviewing candidates, completing applications, conducting outreach, etc. For those that are familiar with and have completed LMOs in the past, I would recommend budgeting for about 50 to 60% of additional man hours. Previously, the contact points at Service Canada were fairly straightforward. In Newfoundland and Labrador, one could simply contact one of the few officers in-house and ask questions about their file. That has since changed when the Atlantic provinces began a work-share program through a central processing center in Nova Scotia. This follows the Western model, where one call center will attempt to answer questions for all the Western files. If you are fortunate enough to be in possession of the officer on your file's individual contact information, try to reach them directly. In most cases, however, you may be stuck with the call centers. New staffing changes within Service Canada have prompted the TFW unit's phones to be answered by another division of the government. This adds an additional level of challenge as the new operators tend to have very little intimate knowledge of the temporary foreign worker program, and oftentimes the extent of their power is limited to an email or a piece of information stating that they will send an email to the officer. As we have seen in the past, if an officer has made an error on an application, it is almost impossible to speak with them directly. This is the program as it stands, and we need to find a way to work with it. I have a very effective and surefire tip on how to overcome maneuvering through the call center tree. Unfortunately, Christina won't let me share it on here as it is being recorded for future viewing. It is a really good one though, so if you would like to know, call me later and I'd be happy to walk you through it.
When you are calling Service Canada, there's two pieces of advice that I can offer you. Number one is to have patience, and number two is being very vigilant. Be sure to set aside some time to go through the call center, because look out, you're going to be forwarded to about a lot of personnel and be put on hold and having to explain again and again to different people on the other end what your question is. So please, set aside some time to do this. Don't make that call thinking it will be a 10 to 15 minute call, because sorry to burst your bubble. Speaking from my experience, my average call time with Service Canada based on a simple question is roughly 40 minutes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about advertising. New standards have come into effect recently in regards to the mandatory advertising requirements for an LMO application. These are in place to ensure all Canadians and permanent residents nationwide who may be searching for a job know about your vacancy. I will begin speaking about the semi-skilled or lower skilled requirements, as they tend to be the most onerous. The government defines a job posting as an announcement of an employment opportunity in a public medium, such as newspapers, job posting, internet sites, bulletin boards, etc. It provides a broad exposure of the vacancy to Canadian citizens and permanent residents in Canada who would be potential candidates for this position. To meet the minimum advertising requirements set by the program, employers must advertise on the National Job Bank or its provincial or territorial counterparts in BC, Saskatchewan, the Northwest Territories, Quebec, Newfoundland, and Labrador. And that advertisement must be posted for a minimum of 4 weeks, starting the first day the ad appears and is accessible to the general public. Now, I want to take a moment here and stress that point. This specific reason is one of the primary phone calls I get from employers who have tried this on their own and failed. It is the cause for many denials. Just because you have set the posting on a specific date, it does not mean that the job bank has officially made it live. Keep checking that site the days following to ensure it is actually posted, and then print a screenshot both at the beginning, the first time you see that posting, and right before submission after your 4 weeks is completed. Sometimes Service Canada may bump your ad for one reason or another. Sorry, the job bank may bump your ad for one reason or another. And if it is not posted for the full 4 weeks, you will receive a denial. It's also important to note that your advertisement must remain posted to actively seek qualified Canadians and permanent residents until the date of the labor market opinion issuance, which means even if it takes 3 months, 4 months to receive that Service Canada labor market opinion approval, you must have your ads live throughout. This will be a recurring theme throughout this call. There is no reason to allow your ads to expire, and we'll talk more on that later. Using 2 or more additional methods of recruitment consistent with the normal practice for the occupation is also important. Employers can choose 1 or more recruitment methods among these. Print media, whether that be local newspaper, job boards, magazines, etc. General employment websites, some examples include Job Boom, Workopolis, Monster. There are a number of options out there. And I'll reinforce that the advertisement must be posted for a minimum of 4 weeks, starting on the first day the ad appears and is accessible to the general public. This is the bare minimum, and we're not bare minimum people. We'll speak a little bit more on that later, but I would highly encourage additional outreach and going so far as reaching out to local businesses that might have bulletin boards that have job postings on them, sending direct mailers out to neighboring communities, basically making sure that everybody within a very specific radius of your business knows that this job exists. Now, I had a question before this webinar on this following section. Underrepresented groups are incredibly important. Underrepresented groups can include a wide range of things, and a full list is available. I'll provide a link to that later. But when looking at those, you should try to recruit from local and territorial, provincial employment centers. You should be looking at service centers for Aboriginal youth. You should be reaching out to native bands. You should be looking at groups or areas where new immigrants gather, and you should be looking at community centers for handy-capable individuals. A business can also offer bursaries to attract students or youth and pursue online recruitment strategies within those. One might also choose to undertake ongoing advertising and interviews on a regular basis throughout these underrepresented groups. Now, let's look a little at what your ads look like. A primary reason for denials, and one that we hear of quite a bit when employers are coming to us for the first time, are based on the fact that companies are using their standard internal advertisements for these labor market opinion applications. Service Canada needs to see several things, and I'll list them below, before they identify an advertisement as valid. These advertisements must include your official company operating name, and if it's a numbered company, make sure you've got your operating as and include the actual name of the company in there as well. Your business address, the title of the position you're recruiting for, the job duties that are going to be involved, and you can be as detailed as possible as long as they are aligned with what Service Canada considers that not code. And I can answer more questions on that later if you'd like. The terms of the employment, whether that's going to be a project, short-term, long-term, permanent, and ongoing, that needs to be outlined in your advertisement. And the wage rate. Now, even though often suggested by some Service Canada officers, I highly encourage you not to put a wage range or outline that this rate may increase based on experience. While a few officers may accept and even encourage this method, the vast majority have been known to deny this application if it is not an exact figure. Let's talk briefly about the prevailing wage rate. For those of you who do not know where to find this, you should be looking at www.workingincanada.gc.ca. This rate is the average wage one would make in this position and the absolute minimum one can offer a temporary foreign worker. Please, please, please check this rate regularly throughout the application process. Working in Canada has been known to change these wages drastically and without notice halfway through the advertising period. If you catch it early enough, you won't waste too much time in reposting and reevaluating your program if it is a significant change. If not, this could mean the difference between your approval and your denial. If the prevailing wage rate is not listed, and this happens a lot, try calling your local Service Canada office. They have systems in place of determining a figure before you begin speculating. Again, if you have further questions about this, or you see value in me hosting an Intro to LMOs webinar where we can talk about this a little further, please let me know. Other things to include in your job ads. If there is a benefits package being offered, make sure that's on there. If the location of work is different from the business address, include the local area, city, and town. Include 2 different forms of contact information, whether that be a telephone number, a cell phone number, an email address, a fax number, or a mailing address. There should also be 2 separate methods to apply for this opportunity. Include your skills requirements for the position, whether that be educational requirements, work experience, and a few other elements that might come into play.
As Ben discussed regarding the prevailing wage, the same applies here for when it comes to listing skill requirements. I can't seem to stress enough to not guess. You have to be very specific in your descriptions. It's best to steer away from providing a range if possible. For example, the term "some experience with" or "with 1 to 3 years of experience" should not be in your vocab when preparing a job ad for your LMO application. Instead, be specific, specifying what you ultimately need by saying "with 3 years of experience."
I couldn't agree with you more, Christina. The more detailed you are, as long as they are aligned with the Service Canada standards based on the NOC codes, the better off you are. Make sure you are specific, and make sure that you leave absolutely no speculation for when you get to the visa stage, when your candidates are applying for a visa overseas, that you can be certain that they meet that experience. It's also important to note that third-party representatives and recruiters can be the main point of contact for any job advertisements posted on behalf of the employer. However, the ad must be listed under the employer's CRA business number. And I can answer more questions on that later. Looking at additional advertising requirements, employers may be required to conduct alternative or additional advertising efforts, such as an increased duration and length of time, or broader advertisement strategy, whether that be local, regional, national, whatever it might be. They might request you increase your reach. These additional advertising efforts would be required if Human Resources and Skills Development Canada, which is HRSDC or Service Canada, determines that it would likely yield qualified Canadians and permanent residents who are available to work in this occupation and region. Remember, if you go above and beyond up front without being prompted to do so, you can avoid unnecessary delays later based on an officer's speculation that the extent of your advertising was not significant enough.
This step is critical. I've worked with a number of employers who have been very creative and proactive, as a matter of fact, when it comes to ensuring they advertise extensively. One example would be a restaurant that posted the words "now hiring" with big, bold, 10-inch letters under the sign of their company's logo, facing the oncoming traffic to get the attention of drivers and pedestrians. If you happen to do something like this, remember to take a picture of it and include it in your application as supporting evidence.
It's a great point. Let's talk a little bit more about the proof of advertisements that must be included in these applications. Employers must demonstrate that they meet the advertising requirements by providing proof, and in so providing the results of their efforts of recruiting Canadians and permanent residents. This proof could include copies of advertisements and the information to support where, when, and how long the position was advertised. And as Christina mentioned, taking pictures and including those in your application. Remember, guys, the more, the better. Records of the employer's efforts should be kept for a minimum of 6 years, as stipulated in provincial and territorial and federal legislation, such as the Income Tax Act. Service Canada may also request these documents for future assessments. So keep copies of every submission, save it, file it away for 6 years. When advertising to underrepresented groups, you really need to be careful. Service Canada requires that a business reach out to what they have defined as underrepresented groups. I do not recommend that you skip this step, as it will help you prove that you are going above and beyond to ensure that your ads are seen. There is a detailed list that I'm going to include on here. You'll see the web link is attached to the bottom here, and again, you'll get this in the following email. But go so far as to reach out to community centers even if they don't want your ads, by including copies of your sent fax transmissions or emails back from community centers that say, we don't want your ads anymore. All of that can be included as evidence for this file.
I agree 100% with what Ben just said. The most important aspect to this is letting your community know that you are hiring. Like he said, consider posting your job at local cafes, local YMCAs, union and native group or association boards, etc.
Yeah, get involved in the community and let them know. Remember, even an angry email saying stop posting your ads can help. Or stop sending us your ads. Okay, let's talk about skilled positions and the difference between the semi-skilled that we've been speaking about and the skilled positions that many of you might be interested in. The primary difference on an LMO application for these positions is in relation to the scope of advertising. For skilled positions, the major differences are listed here. First and foremost, employers recruiting really highly skilled workers in areas where use of the job bank or its provincial/territorial counterparts is not considered an effective method of recruitment. Write a written explanation of the alternative method used with their application. And that might be for a very highly skilled engineering position where engineers might not check the job bank for those roles. You would instead focus on trades journals. I would recommend putting the job on the job bank anyways. It doesn't cost anything, it's not an additional level of work, and it's effective, and you can bypass the explanation piece. But you will also need to go above and beyond and make sure that you are posting those ads in areas where those types of individuals might be viewing. They encourage other methods of recruitment, and those include participation at job fairs, partnering with training institutions, or offering internships, using professional recruitment agencies and documenting that relationship, consultations with unions for available labor, whether they be local or international, advertising through professional associations, or finally, if this was possible, I'm sure you wouldn't be coming to me today, but recruitment within your company, whether that's promoting candidates from within or bringing in candidates from different locations. Again, I'm going to stress that employers must continue to advertise the available position and actively seek qualified Canadians and permanent residents until the date they receive notification that the labor market opinion has been issued. That's both a Service Canada requirement and a diamond requirement. There is no reason not to have your ads live. If you receive a denial, you will have those ads live so you can fix the problem and move forward. We'll talk more on those later. Okay, let's talk LMO strategy. With these newest changes that have recently come into effect, defining a proper LMO strategy has become more important than ever. With the implementation of the new fee, employers will be much less likely to apply for additional LMO spaces in order to plan for replacement candidates or future recruitment. I highly recommend beginning every foreign recruitment program with an initial planning meeting and trying to forecast 24 months in advance. Depending on your province, the source country you may be looking at candidates from, the local trade certification requirements, current embassy or consulate strikes like the one we're experiencing right now, and current political climates, it may take well over a year to have boots on the ground. It is vital to outline up front if your company can afford to wait that long, or if you need to define a strategy where arrivals can occur much quicker. Diamond has a European headquarters in Dublin, Ireland to support recruitment from all visa-exempt countries. This will drastically reduce processing time, but may or may not be right for you. Veterans of this program will share stories of how difficult it is to sometimes get responses from somebody within Service Canada, or how frustrating it is that you may need to wait a week before they correct a spelling mistake that an officer has made on an AMAD request. Plan for these delays. Start several months early. If you manage the expectations of your future employees, many can afford to wait a few months in their source country before deployment into Canada. Remember, you have 6 months to use your LMO spaces. Manage your time accordingly. Okay, the 4-year cap, the 4-year rule. This is going to be enforced for the first time in 2015. What this means is that candidates who have been in Canada for 4 years, whether it be with you or with other employers, without documented evidence that they are on a permanent residency track, will be required to return home for a period of 4 years. When hiring a temporary foreign worker who is already in Canada, make sure you find out when they initially arrived and ask for copies of documents. You'll be able to track their eligibility to remain in Canada. It's going to be vital if you have somebody that's been here 3 years already and you're not going to get a full year out of their employment, that might change whether or not you want to go through this process. Many overseas temporary foreign workers will be looking for the opportunity to become permanent residents. This is not a simple process. I highly recommend engaging an immigration firm up front so that you know your options. Make sure that the candidates you select now will qualify for permanent residency several years in the future. That's going to happen by thorough screening and basing recruitment strategies on potential retention strategies. At Diamond, we pre-screen every potential recruit for permanent residency potential. The worst thing I can do is bring somebody in, take them through this entire process, have them start working, and have you fall in love with them just to tell you they will not be able to immigrate because they don't have the educational requirements. Creating a defined permanent residencies track for them is vital. Outline it clearly and stick to it. If your workers are in a skilled role, they may qualify after working with you for only 1 year. Share this with them. If they are in a semi-skilled capacity, the opportunity to be promoted may exist at some point down the line. Alternatively, provincial programs exist to nominate semi-skilled candidates in certain roles. Do not keep your workers in the dark. Do not ask them to do it on their own. These temporary foreign workers are coming to Canada and in many cases can be approached by unscrupulous immigration consultants. And if you allow them to take on this entire process by themselves, you may find that they either misrepresent themselves or your company on their application. That can do damage to you, that can do damage to your candidates' files, and that can send them home quickly. If you feel that they are interested and they feel that you want to help them with your permanent residency applications, you may find that will drastically increase retention rates down the line. These people know they have 4 years here. And trust me, they have done the research.
I would like to take this opportunity to call the attention of all the Alberta employers listening on today's webinar. Please do note, if you currently have temporary foreign workers in your business, there may be a small window of opportunity right now for you to apply to nominate your TFWs for permanent resident visas. You can do this through the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program, as well as known as AIMP who have made changes to the program to make it easier. But please keep in mind, these changes are only available till November the 28th.
That's a great point. Alberta employers, this is a very unique opportunity. This is not an ongoing program. The AINP has a wonderful program, but they've lifted the cap on a number of positions. So if you've got TFWs and you have questions about this, or you want more details, or you didn't receive our recent email, call us. I'd be happy to walk you through this, or book an appointment with one of our immigration consultants in-house. Okay, let's look at promotions and extensions. When forecasting and planning to keep your candidates after they've arrived, plan for delays. Apply going so far as 7 months in advance of work permit expiries and keep your ads alive. That way, if you receive a denial, you do not need to wait another 4 weeks for advertising. You can fix that error and you can submit immediately. Remember, you have 6 months to use those applications. Just because you get it today doesn't mean you have to use it tomorrow. You can submit for that new work permit in 5.5 months. Okay, here's the tough one. Here's the one I get the most questions about. I received a denial. What do I do now? I've completed all of the information you requested. I've advertised appropriately. I followed the Service Canada to the letter. I've done everything right, and yet I received that fax outlining that I've got a denial. What do I do now? First and foremost, you must look at the actual reason for your denial. Did you misspell a name? Did you miss a signature? Did you forget to post an ad for the correct amount of time? Did you post a wage that has since been reviewed? Depending on the reason for your denial, you may be out of luck. You may just have no options and have to start again. The good news is you're going to have kept your ads live. We'll be able to fix the error and resubmit at the drop of a hat as soon as possible. You won't have to wait the additional 4 weeks.
Speaking from my personal experience, if it is a minor typo or hiccup that can be easily resolved, correct it and send it immediately to Service Canada. Stamp the words urgent all over your cover letter if necessary. Even go the extra mile to add a blurb about how it was a minor error, but now your business will suffer without these candidates. And request expedited review. Sometimes you might just get lucky.
It's very easy for somebody not to return a voicemail. And when that Service Canada stamps that denial, when that officer stamps the denial on a file, their job is done. To get them to either reopen it or review it, it is incredibly time sensitive. Get to them ASAP. If you have a representative, tell them to be vigilant. Do not stop calling. Do not stop sending faxes. If you have a chance of overturning that decision with the officer, you've got a very short time period to do so. This is worth a try, though. This might be the only avenue you have as an employer to avoid a new submission. Now, if, however, you've completed everything perfectly, you haven't made any mistakes, you provided more than enough evidence and proof for your approval, you've followed all the tips I've mentioned today, and your officer still denies your application, you still have an option. If you have reason to believe that the officer acted erroneously or has unfairly allowed personal bias to sway the decision, remember, they are human beings and sometimes that happens, and I have heard recently of a story of an officer saying to me, well, my brother is a mechanic in Toronto and he can't find work, so there's no labor shortage, even though this position was based in Edmonton, Alberta. Christina, what would you do as a client logistics specialist for LMOs at Diamond? What would you do in this case?
Well, Ben, first and foremost, I would more than likely contact the officer and request the name of a supervisor along with their fax line. If that happened to not work, I would send the application with an amended cover letter stamped with the title urgent, supervisory review, and explain in detail why I believe the application was judged unfairly. This method has worked in the past, however, it may take some time. It's worth a shot, and I will continue to follow up with faxes to the appropriate fax number and get evidence that the faxes did go through as well.
It's a good point, and it's important to note that this is not a surefire method to overturn an objection, but it has worked in the past. Now, that was before the new LMO change and the new fees in place, but this may be your only chance to avoid that new LMO fee and starting again from scratch. Employers requesting that their LMO application be reconsidered by another officer as a result of a negative LMO must submit a new application and processing fee for each position. I often have clients call me and let me know that they're going to try it on their own first, and if it does not yield an approval, then they'll come to a professional. And in the past, I would encourage that. It's important to know how much work and effort goes into the process firsthand. Unfortunately, with this new fee, that changes the game a little bit. If you are a cost-conscious and time-sensitive business, trust a professional from the beginning. At Diamond, we live and breathe these applications. This is what we do. With the new per-candidate cost associated, these denials can be very expensive. Now, I hope we've given you and your business some suggestions and insights today that will help you with your applications moving forward. Overall, my advice is to have patience and be vigilant. Give yourself enough time to go through the process, answer every question with micro detail, and recognize that no matter how much you plan, give yourself an additional 3 months on the process. Know that only at certain benchmarks should you start looking for housing and booking flights and planning shifts and getting ready for your arrivals, because those delays can add up. Now, I'm not saying don't ensure that housing is available. What I'm saying is don't sign a lease. I've worked with a number of business clients that have become extremely frustrated with the process because an apartment has been secured too early and is left sitting empty for 3 to 4 months at the company's expense. Now, this ends the tip section of our webinar. Let's take some questions. I think we have a couple minutes for Q&A right now, so I can try to answer a few of them for you. And for everyone that I don't answer, I am available. I'm going to provide all of my contact information afterwards to give you some follow-up, and hopefully we can be in touch shortly. So I've got a few here. The first one that comes up is, if a company has their LMO denied, does this have any impact for that company when submitting future LMOs? That's a great question, and that depends on the denial reason. Now, most companies, especially ones who have tried the process on their own, have tried and failed, whether it be because of advertising challenges or changes in forms. If it's a basic denial, the answer is no. The Service Canada officer will see that, but they'll just double-check the new application to make sure that you've corrected that. As a matter of fact, I would recommend being so vigilant and being the individual that keeps banging on that door until you get that approval. We've been in markets that are extremely difficult during recessionary times where Service Canada wouldn't approve anything, but we would see that approval on the 3rd application. So for standard reasons, I'd say no, it doesn't have any effect. If you violate something or there's a big red flag, like this is not an appropriate employer, then they'll review the notes that were on that application previously. The next question is, are ads on websites such as Kijiji or Craigslist a valid source of advertising? Free ad sites, especially those that have high volume like Kijiji or Craigslist, are a great choice, something to definitely use to beef up your submission. For very highly skilled positions, again like engineers and CEOs or something along those lines, you're not going to find that those people use Craigslist or Kijiji. So that might not be the best strategy. I wouldn't limit your advertising to these sites. Make sure, I mean, in the past you could get away with getting an LMO approval from the job bank and Craigslist. Now I would recommend going above and beyond. Denials are too expensive and there is no reason to not put in the extra time to post nationally. And remember, you need national exposure, and Craigslist is separated via city. The next question is, can you provide any templates for successful cover letters for LMO applications? That's a great question, and I would love to create a very specific tip. And maybe what we'll do later is we'll do a webinar on Intro to LMOs, where we can talk about what goes into a standard LMO cover letter. I don't know if I can provide you any of ours because they're very, very company specific. Each one is unique, and if I give you those details, I'll be breaching confidentiality. But what we can do is we can set up a separate meeting where I can teach you how to include all of that information. But the cover letters are exceptionally important here. Okay, we have time for one more question. I've got two good ones here, though. Okay, what is the average time for a decision on an LMO? Veterans of this program are looking at this screen or listening and saying, oh man, I wish I knew the answer to that. Every single office and every single officer takes a different strategy here. And I might be able to offer regional timelines based on the parts of the country that you're applying in. But you know what we know for sure is that there's absolutely no way to predict this. You might find that your file sits on somebody's desk while they go on holidays, and that might take an extra 2 or 3 weeks. Or you might find that somehow your file slipped in and gets approved in a few weeks, which we have seen, which is exceptional. One thing I can say for sure is, in my experience, British Columbia is probably the slowest. BC is probably the longest processing time, followed by Alberta. Manitoba is relatively quick. Ontario is not too extensive. The Atlantic provinces were the fastest. I have to give a big shout out to Newfoundland and Labrador. They were my absolute favorite office to deal with. But since they combined with the case processing center there, you might have your applications approved by some of the neighboring provinces. Okay, unfortunately, guys, we have run out of time for questions. If I haven't addressed your question, I will contact you directly with an answer. I'm going to make sure that you have all of my contact information. I am available. I'm actually headed to St. John's, Newfoundland, Monday through Wednesday, so if you'd like to sit down, I'd love to answer any of your questions. I'll be in Alberta later in the month, and basically I live on Air Canada Seat 12A, so I'm consistently moving around. Please contact me. I'd love to sit down with you and learn more about your unique labor shortage. On behalf of Christina and I, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. Good luck with your applications. If you have any questions or feedback on this webinar, please, please, please contact me at any time. My email and phone contacts are listed on this slide, or you can connect with me through LinkedIn or any method you can imagine. I am available. And if at any stage you feel that this process is too much for your organization to handle all internally, please get in touch with me. We'd be happy to help at Diamond Global. That's what we do. We live and breathe these applications. On behalf of Christina and I, thank you so much. Have a really great day, and I look forward to speaking with you all soon.